Mocked as weaklings, humans arrived and shattered the War Academy. The transport ship descended through the crimson clouds of the Raxus Prime, its hull groaning against the planet's aggressive atmosphere as 12 human soldiers sat in silence inside the cargo bay. They had traveled for 8 months through the cold void of space to reach this moment, and not one of them knew if they would ever see Earth again. Commander Elena Vasquez checked her gear one final time and looked at her squad, 11 men and women who had volunteered for what many called a suicide mission. They were the first humans ever accepted into the Galactic War Academy, an institution that had trained elite warriors from over 200 alien species for more than 6,000 years. "Remember what I told you," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "We are not here to make friends. We are here to prove that humanity belongs among the stars." The ship landed with a heavy thud, and the cargo doors hissed open to reveal a massive courtyard filled with hundreds of alien cadets. The sight would have terrified any normal human, but these 12 were not normal. They were the best Earth had to offer. Towering Vorthak warriors stood in rigid formations, their reptilian bodies covered in natural armor that could stop bullets. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall with horns curving from their skulls and claws that could tear through steel. Beside them, the Crethian insectoids clicked their mandibles in what sounded like laughter, their 4 arms folded across chitinous chests. Their compound eyes reflected the humans like broken mirrors. The humans marched down the ramp in perfect formation, their boots striking the metal in unison. They wore simple gray uniforms with no armor, no weapons, and no visible technology, just fabric and determination. A massive Vorthak in ceremonial armor stepped forward. His scales were dark green, scarred from countless battles, and his eyes burned with barely concealed contempt. This was Commandant Thulvarak, the supreme leader of the Academy and a legend among his people. "So these are the humans," he growled, his voice rumbling like thunder across the courtyard. "The Galactic Concord has forced us to accept you, but do not mistake obligation for welcome." Elena stepped forward and saluted in the human military fashion. "Commander Elena Vasquez, representing Earth and the United Human Coalition. We are honored to train at your institution, Commandant." Thulvarak leaned down, bringing his massive horned head close to Elena's face. His breath was hot and smelled of something metallic. "Honored," he repeated, and the word dripped with mockery. "Look around you, human. Every species here possesses something that makes them worthy of this academy. The Vorthak have strength and armor. The Crethians have speed and numbers. The Rithians can run for days without rest. The Torvali can regenerate lost limbs within hours." He straightened and swept his clawed hand toward the human squad. "What do you have? Soft skin that tears at the slightest touch, fragile bones that shatter under pressure. You require sleep every single cycle, and your lifespans are so short that by the time you master anything, you are already dying of old age." Laughter erupted from the assembled cadets, hissing, clicking, growling sounds that filled the courtyard like a wave of contempt. A young Vorthak near the front made a gesture that Elena did not recognize but understood perfectly. It was an insult. "You will be assigned to Barracks 17, Thulvarak continued. "Gather your belongings and report there immediately." Elena noticed several cadets exchange amused glances at the mention of Barracks 17. She would learn later that those quarters were traditionally reserved for the cleaning staff, species considered too weak for combat but useful for maintenance. As the humans marched toward their assigned barracks, the whispers followed them like shadows. "Velkari," a Crethian hissed to his companion, "that is what we should call them, the soft ones." The name spread through the crowd within minutes, and soon every alien in the courtyard was using it. Velkari. It was spoken with laughter, with pity, with disgust. Barracks 17 was exactly what Elena had expected. A cramped, poorly maintained building at the far edge of the academy grounds. The beds were too short for human proportions, the climate control was broken, and the walls were stained with age. But the humans said nothing. They simply began unpacking their gear and making the space their own. Private James Chen, the squad's medic, looked around the dingy room and let out a dry laugh. "Well, Commander, it seems we have been given the presidential suite." Elena allowed herself a small smile as she set down her bag. "It does not matter where we sleep. What matters is what we do when we are awake." Sergeant Yuki Tanaka, a compact woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, pulled out a small data pad and began scanning the room for surveillance devices. "They are watching us," she reported. 3 hidden cameras, 2 audio sensors." "Good," Elena replied, surprising her squad. "Let them watch. Let them see everything we do." She gathered her team in the center of the room, and they formed a tight circle, 12 humans alone on an alien world surrounded by species that wanted them to fail. "I will not lie to you," Elena began, her voice barely above a whisper. "The next 2 years will be the hardest of our lives. We will be mocked, beaten, humiliated, and pushed beyond every limit we thought we had. They want us to quit. They want us to prove that humans do not belong here." She looked each of them in the eye, one by one. "But we are not going to quit. We are going to show them something they have never seen before. Every species here was born with their advantages: armor, claws, speed, strength. We were born with none of those things, and yet humanity conquered Earth. We climbed to the top of our food chain not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we refused to give up." James Chen nodded, his jaw set with determination. "What do you need from us, Commander?" Elena straightened and looked toward the window where the Academy's main buildings loomed against the alien sky. "I need you to remember 3 words," she said. "Let them watch." Outside, the twin suns of the Raxus Prime began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Somewhere in the distance, alien cadets laughed and trained and prepared for another day of dominance. They had no idea that everything they knew was about to change. The soft ones had arrived, and they had brought something far more dangerous than claws or armor. They had brought the stubborn, relentless, unstoppable will of humanity. Mocked as weaklings, humans arrived and shattered the War Academy. The first month at the Academy was a nightmare that never seemed to end. Every morning began at what the aliens called the 4th cycle, roughly 3 hours before the local sunrise, and the humans were expected to be in formation alongside species that required only 2 hours of sleep per night. Elena and her squad stumbled through those early days on sheer willpower, their bodies screaming for rest that never came. The physical assessments were designed to humiliate them, and they succeeded. In the strength tests, the humans ranked dead last. Even the smallest Vorthak cadet could lift 3 times what the strongest human could manage. Private Marcus Webb, who had been a champion weightlifter on Earth, was laughed off the testing floor when he failed to move a standard training weight that Vorthak children used for practice. The speed trials were even worse. The 4-legged Rithians could sprint at nearly 80 kilometers per hour, and they lapped the humans so many times that the instructors eventually stopped counting. Sergeant Tanaka, the fastest runner in the human squad, finished her race to find the Rithians already showered and eating their midday meal. And the combat training, that was where the real cruelty began. Instructor Kalvith was a scarred Krethian veteran who had fought in 3 galactic wars. He had 4 arms, each one capable of wielding a weapon with deadly precision, and he made no secret of his hatred for the human cadets. "You do not belong here," he told Elena during their first training session, his mandibles clicking with each word. "You should withdraw before you embarrass yourselves further. Better to leave with your dignity than to be carried out in medical pods." Elena said nothing. She simply assumed her fighting stance and waited for the session to begin. The Krethian attacked with blinding speed, and Elena was on the ground before she even saw him move. Her ribs ached, Her vision blurred and she could taste blood in her mouth. But she stood up. Calveth struck her down again, and again she rose. By the fifth time, he was no longer laughing. "Why do you keep getting up?" he demanded, genuine confusion in his alien voice. "You cannot win. You must know this." Elena wiped the blood from her lip and raised her fists once more. "Because I am not trying to win today," she replied. "I am trying to learn." The worst came during a combat simulation 3 weeks into their training. A young Vorthak named Draxus had made it his personal mission to break the humans. He was the son of a famous general, raised from birth to believe that strength was everything and that weakness deserved to be crushed. The simulation was supposed to be a simple team exercise, capture the flag with non-lethal weapons, but Draxus had other plans. He ignored the objectives and instead led his squad directly at the human position with maximum force. The attack was brutal and one-sided. Draxus personally targeted the human cadets with shots that were technically within regulations, but clearly intended to cause maximum pain. When Private Chen tried to help a fallen teammate, Draxus hit him with 3 consecutive blasts that sent him flying into a wall. By the end of the simulation, 3 humans were in the medical bay with broken bones and internal bruising. The Academy physicians looked at them with something that might have been pity. "Your species heals slowly," one of them observed. "These injuries will take weeks to repair." But something strange happened. The humans returned to training before their injuries had fully healed. They wrapped their broken ribs, taped their sprained joints, and showed up to every single session without complaint. The other cadets did not understand. Why suffer needlessly when they could simply rest? The humans also started doing something that no one had seen before. They began studying. Every night, after the brutal training sessions ended, the human squad gathered in their cramped barracks and analyzed everything they had experienced. Sergeant Tanaka compiled data on every species' fighting style, noting strengths and weaknesses. Private Chen studied alien physiology, learning where their bodies were vulnerable. And Elena developed strategies that did not rely on strength or speed. "The Vorthak telegraphed their attacks," she explained one night, drawing diagrams on her data pad. "They are so confident in their power that they do not bother to hide their movements. We can use that. The Krethians are fast, but they struggle to change direction once they commit to a strike," Tanaka added. "If we can bait them into overextending, we can counter." Slowly, almost invisibly, the humans began to improve. They still lost most of their matches, but they started lasting longer. A fight that once ended in seconds now stretched to minutes. A Rithian who expected an easy victory found herself working harder than she had anticipated. The instructors began to notice. "The humans are adapting," Calveth reported to Commandant Thulvarak during a private meeting. "They are not getting stronger, but they are getting smarter. They study us like we are puzzles to be solved." Thulvarak dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. "Intelligence means nothing without power to back it up. They will break eventually. They all do." But in Barracks 17, the humans continued their work. They ran extra laps when no one was watching, practiced combat techniques late into the night, and supported each other through every setback. When Marcus Webb broke his arm for the second time, his squadmates took turns helping him train one-handed until he healed. James Chen developed a new protocol for their limited medical supplies, finding ways to accelerate their healing using techniques the alien physicians had never considered. He combined human medicine with alien herbs he found growing near the barracks, creating treatments that worked better than either alone. And Elena kept a small notebook hidden beneath her bed. Inside were detailed notes on every cadet, every instructor, and every weakness she had observed. The Vorthak were proud and easily angered. The Krethians were overconfident in their speed. The Rithians panicked when separated from their packs. One night, Private Chen asked her a question that had been on everyone's mind. Commander, do you really think we can do this? Can we actually compete against species that are built for war? Elena closed her notebook and looked at her exhausted, battered, unbroken squad. Humans have fought each other for 10,000 years, she said quietly. We have survived ice ages, plagues, famines, and wars that killed millions. We are not built for war, James. We are built for survival, and that is something far more dangerous. She pointed toward the main academy building, visible through their tiny window. They think strength is everything, but strength is just one tool in a very large box. We are going to show them what happens when you underestimate the species that clawed its way to dominance on a death world using nothing but rocks and stubbornness. Outside, the alien moons rose over the Raxus Prime, and somewhere in the academy, Draxus was laughing with his friends about the weak little humans he had crushed. He had no idea that those same humans were preparing to turn his world upside down. The soft ones were learning, adapting, and growing stronger in ways that could not be measured on any standard test. And soon, the entire academy would understand why humanity had never stayed down. Hash mocked as weaklings. Humans arrived and shattered the War Academy. The tactical simulation trials were the most prestigious event of the Academy's training cycle, and every cadet dreamed of glory on that stage. For 6,000 years, the strongest species had dominated these trials, proving their worth through raw power and overwhelming force. When the matchups were announced, the entire Academy erupted in laughter. The human squad had been placed against 3 full Vorthak teams in a capture-the-objective scenario, 36 of the largest, strongest warriors in the Academy against 12 small, soft, fragile humans. The Academy's tactical computer calculated the odds at 97.3% against the humans. Some cadets argued that even this number was too generous. Draxus was leading one of the Vorthak teams, and he could barely contain his excitement. This was his chance to crush the humans completely, to prove once and for all that they did not belong in the Academy. He gathered his warriors and made them a promise. "We will end this in 5 minutes," he declared, his voice booming with confidence. "The soft ones will learn what happens when prey stands against predators." The viewing galleries were packed with spectators from every species. Even Commandant Thulvarik had come to watch what everyone assumed would be a slaughter. Instructor Kalvith stood in the corner with his 4 arms crossed, curious to see how long the humans would last. The simulation arena was a massive underground complex filled with corridors, rooms, and obstacles. The objective was simple: capture the enemy's flag and return it to your base. The Vorthak teams would start from 3 different positions, surrounding the human base in a classic pincer formation. When the starting signal sounded, the Vorthak charged forward with thunderous roars. Their heavy footsteps shook the ground, and their armor gleamed under the artificial lights. They expected to find the humans cowering in their base, waiting to be overrun. But the base was empty. Draxus skidded to a halt, confusion twisting his reptilian features. Where had the soft ones gone? He activated his communicator and called the other teams. "Report, do you have eyes on the humans?" "Negative," came the reply from Team 2. "Their base is abandoned." "Same here," reported Team 3. "No contact." In the viewing gallery, murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. What kind of strategy was this? Abandoning your base was considered foolish in any military doctrine. Deep in the complex, Elena led her squad through the ventilation system, pathways too small for the bulky Vorthak to follow. They had spent weeks studying the arena layout, memorizing every duct, every maintenance tunnel, every hidden passage that the larger species ignored because they simply could not fit. "Team 1 is at coordinates 774, Tanaka reported, her voice barely a whisper. "They are moving toward the central junction." Elena nodded and signaled her squad to halt. "Chen, Webb, take positions at Junction 3. When I give the signal, collapse the ceiling supports. Use the charges we prepared." The humans moved like shadows, their soft footsteps making no sound against the metal floors. They had trained for this moment, running silent movement drills every night while the other cadets slept. Now that training was paying off. In the arena below, the Vorthak teams had regrouped and were searching methodically for their prey. Draxus was growing frustrated. This was supposed to be a quick victory, not a hunting expedition. "Spread out," he ordered. "Find them and crush them." That was exactly what Alina wanted to hear. The first explosion came without warning. A section of ceiling collapsed directly onto Team 3, burying 4 Vorthak warriors under tons of rubble. They were not injured badly, but they were trapped, struggling to free themselves from the debris. "What was that?" Draxus roared into his communicator. "Report." Before anyone could answer, the lights went out. The arena plunged into complete darkness, and the Vorthak's natural night vision, excellent by most standards, struggled to adjust. But the humans had prepared for this too. They wore specialized goggles that Chen had modified using alien technology salvaged from broken equipment. In the viewing gallery, the spectators watched through thermal imaging as the humans moved with perfect coordination. They struck from the shadows, hitting isolated Vorthak with precise shots before vanishing again. It was not a battle, it was a hunt, and the predators had become the prey. Draxus heard his warriors falling one by one, their elimination signals pinging across his communicator. He spun around, searching desperately for enemies he could not see. "Show yourselves," he bellowed, his pride wounded more than his body. "Face me like warriors." A voice came from directly behind him, calm, steady, and utterly unafraid. "Warriors adapt to win," Alina said. "We are not here to satisfy your pride. We are here to capture your flag." Draxus whirled and charged with all his strength, determined to crush this insolent human. But Alina did not try to meet his power. She simply stepped aside at the last moment, using his own momentum against him. The Vorthak crashed through a wall he had not seen in the darkness, stunning himself against the solid metal. When the lights came back on 11 minutes after the simulation began, the human squad was standing at the victory platform with all 3 Vorthak flags. Not a single human had been eliminated. The viewing gallery was silent, completely, utterly silent. Commandant Thulvarak stared at the scene with an expression that no one could read. His clawed hands gripped the railing so tightly that the metal groaned in protest. Beside him, Kalvith's mandibles hung open in shock. Draxus was pulled from the rubble by Academy staff, his armor dented and his pride shattered. He looked at the humans, these soft, weak, fragile creatures, and for the first time in his life he felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. Alina approached the commandant's viewing box and saluted. "Humans have fought wars against each other for 10,000 years, she said, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "We learned long ago that survival is not about being the strongest. It is about being the most relentless, the most adaptable, and the most willing to do whatever it takes to win." She paused and looked directly into Thulvarak's eyes. "You built this academy to train warriors. We are not warriors in your sense of the word. We are survivors, and survivors do not fight fair." As the human squad marched out of the arena, the other cadets parted before them like water around a stone. The word Velkari was still whispered, but it no longer carried laughter. Something had changed in the academy that day, something fundamental and irreversible. The soft ones had proven that power was not the only path to victory, and that lesson would echo through the halls of the Raxus Prime for generations to come. In his private quarters that night, Thulvarak stared at the replay of the simulation for the 100th time. He had commanded armies, conquered worlds, and defeated enemies that would have made most species flee in terror. But he had never seen anything like what the humans had done. They were dangerous, he realized, more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And for the first time in his long career, The great commandant felt the cold touch of uncertainty. Mocked as weaklings, humans arrived and shattered the War Academy. The Crucible of Verk was the Academy's final and most brutal examination, a 72-hour survival trial on a death-world moon that had claimed the lives of over 300 cadets throughout the Academy's history. Every species feared it, and every species considered completing it the ultimate proof of worthiness. The transport ships descended through the toxic atmosphere of Verk's seventh moon, carrying squads from every species in the Academy. The landscape below was a nightmare of jagged cliffs, boiling geysers, and predators that had evolved to kill anything that moved. Cadets were dropped with minimal supplies and expected to reach an extraction point 50 kilometers away through terrain that wanted them dead. Alina gathered her squad as their ship prepared to land. They had trained harder than ever for this moment, knowing that the Crucible would test everything they had learned. "Stay together, watch each other's backs, and remember, we are not just trying to survive," she said. "We are going to thrive." The first 12 hours were brutal but manageable. The humans moved carefully through the hostile terrain, using techniques they had developed specifically for this environment. They filtered the toxic air through improvised masks, avoided the territorial predators by reading their behavior patterns, and made steady progress toward the extraction point. Other squads were not so fortunate. Screams echoed across the wasteland as cadets fell to predators, poison, and exhaustion. The Vorthak relied on their strength to power through, but even they struggled against a moon that did not care how strong you were. Then, at the 36th hour, disaster struck. A massive tectonic event, triggered by the moon's unstable core, sent shockwaves rippling across the landscape. The ground split open, cliffs collapsed, and an entire canyon system began to cave in on itself. The humans felt the tremor and immediately sought stable ground. But others were not so lucky. Emergency signals began flooding the communication channels. 17 cadets from multiple species were trapped in the collapsing canyon, cut off from escape by walls of falling rock. Their oxygen was running low, their injuries were severe, and rescue ships could not reach them through the geological chaos. Academy protocol was clear. In survival scenarios, squads were responsible only for themselves. Resources were limited, and attempting rescue in such conditions was considered suicide. The other surviving squads heard the distress calls and made the logical choice. They kept moving toward extraction. Alina stopped walking and listened to the desperate voices crying out for help. Among them, she recognized Draxus, the Vorthak who had tried to break her squad, who had sent her people to the medical bay, who had mocked them as weak and worthless. "Commander," Tanaka said quietly, "protocol states that we should continue to extraction. Attempting rescue would put our entire squad at risk." Alina looked at her team. These 11 humans who had followed her through months of abuse, who had trusted her with their lives, who had every reason to leave their tormentors to die. "I know what protocol states," she replied, "but I also know what being human means." She turned to face her squad directly. "I am not ordering anyone to follow me. This is a choice each of you must make for yourselves. If you want to continue to extraction, I will not blame you, but I am going back." James Chen was the first to step forward. "I did not become a medic to let people die when I could help them." One by one, every member of the squad made the same choice. They turned away from safety and began running toward the collapsing canyon. The journey back was terrifying. The ground shook constantly, rocks fell from above, and the air grew thicker with toxic dust. But the humans pushed forward, their lungs burning and their muscles screaming, driven by something that the other species could not understand. They found the first survivors trapped beneath a fallen stone column, 2 Krethian cadets who had given up hope. Chen immediately began treating their injuries, while Webb and Tanaka worked to move the debris. "Why?" one of the Krethians asked, his compound eyes wide with confusion. "Why did you come back? We are not your allies. We laughed at you, called you names. Elena helped lift another rock and threw it aside. You needed help, she said simply. That is the only reason we need. The humans worked for 19 straight hours without rest. They rigged makeshift oxygen recyclers from salvaged equipment, created splints from broken metal, and carried wounded aliens on their backs through passages too unstable for anyone else to navigate. When one human grew too exhausted to continue, another took their place. They rotated seamlessly, covering each other's weaknesses the way they had trained. They found Draxus buried under a collapsed wall, his armored body broken and his fierce eyes dimmed with pain. He looked up at Elena with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not pride, not anger, but raw confusion. You should have left me, he rasped. I tried to destroy you. I hated your kind from the moment you arrived. Elena knelt beside him and began checking his injuries. I know, she replied, but hating someone does not mean you let them die. That is not how humans work. They carried Draxus out on a stretcher they built from scavenged materials. He weighed nearly 300 kilograms, and the humans had to work in teams of 4, rotating every 100 meters. But they did not leave him behind. By the time they reached stable ground, the sun was rising over the devastated landscape. 17 cadets who should have died were alive because 12 humans had refused to abandon them. The rescue ships finally arrived, and Academy medics rushed to help the survivors. Commandant Thulvarak was aboard the lead vessel, his face unreadable as he observed the scene. The humans stood in a ragged group, exhausted beyond measure, their bodies pushed past every limit, but every single one of them was still standing. He approached Elena, who was barely able to keep her eyes open. You violated protocol, he said, his voice carefully neutral. You risked your entire squad for individuals who had shown you nothing but cruelty. Elena straightened despite her exhaustion and met his gaze. With respect, Commandant, we did not violate protocol, we followed a higher one. On Earth, we have a saying, no one gets left behind. It does not matter if they are friends or enemies. When lives are at stake, humans do not walk away. In the medical bay of the rescue ship, Draxus lay on a healing bed with tubes connected to his body. He stared at the ceiling, his mind struggling to process what had happened. His entire life, he had been taught that strength was everything, that the weak existed only to serve or be destroyed. But the weak had just saved his life. James Chen came to check on him, adjusting the medical equipment with practiced hands. You did not have to do this, Draxus said quietly. I was cruel to you, I hurt your friends. Chen shrugged and continued his work. You needed help, he replied. That is what humans do, we help, even when it hurts, even when it costs us, even when the people we are helping do not deserve it. It is not logical, but it is who we are. Draxus turned his head and looked at the young human medic. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside the proud Vorthak warrior. He had been taught all his life to despise weakness, but what he had witnessed was not weakness at all. It was something far more powerful, something he did not have a word for yet. But he would learn. Mocked as weaklings, humans arrived and shattered the War Academy. The graduation ceremony at the Galactic War Academy was the most important event in the institution's calendar, and this year's ceremony would be unlike anything in its 6,000-year history. Representatives from over 100 worlds had traveled to the Raxus Prime to witness the occasion, and whispers of what the humans had accomplished had spread across the entire galaxy. The Great Hall was magnificent, a vast chamber carved from living crystal that sparkled with the light of 1,000 floating orbs. Banners representing every species hung from the ceiling, and holographic displays showed the achievements of the graduating class. Elena stood with her squad in their dress uniforms, simple gray fabric that looked almost primitive compared to the ornate armor of the other species. But they wore those uniforms with pride, knowing what they had overcome to reach this moment. 2 years of mockery, abuse, and pain had led to this day. 12 humans who had arrived as jokes were now standing among the galaxy's elite warriors. Commandant Thulvarak took the stage, his massive form casting a shadow across the assembled crowd. He looked older than he had 2 years ago, and those who knew him well said that something had changed behind his ancient eyes. "Today we honor our graduates," he began, his voice echoing through the crystal hall, warriors who have proven themselves worthy of the title through trials that would break lesser beings. But this year, I must speak of something unprecedented. He paused and looked directly at the human squad. When the humans arrived at this academy, I expected them to fail. I gave them the worst accommodations, the hardest assignments, and allowed other cadets to treat them with contempt. I believed that weakness should be driven out, that only the strong deserve to stand in these halls. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Commandants did not typically confess such things in public. "I was wrong," Thulvarak continued, and a gasp rippled through the audience. "These humans have achieved something that no training manual could have predicted. They have the lowest physical scores in Academy history, and the highest overall performance ratings ever recorded." Holographic displays activated around the hall, showing statistics that made the assembled representatives murmur in shock. The humans had the best strategic thinking scores, the best adaptability ratings, the best unit cohesion measurements, and something the Academy had never formally tracked before: interspecies cooperation effectiveness. During the Crucible of Verk, when 17 cadets were trapped and dying, every other squad followed protocol and continued to extraction, Thulvarak said. The humans turned around. They risked their own lives to save those who had treated them as enemies, carrying wounded warriors through conditions that should have killed them all. In the audience, the survivors of that rescue sat together, Vorthak, Krethian, and Rithian, their species differences suddenly seeming less important than the bond they now shared. "I have spent my entire life studying warfare," the commandant continued. "I have won battles through strength, through tactics, through superior firepower. But I have never seen anything as effective as what these humans demonstrated, not just the will to survive, but the will to protect others while surviving." He straightened to his full height and made an announcement that would echo across the galaxy. "Effective immediately, the Academy's training doctrine will be revised for the first time in 6,000 years. All squads will now integrate mixed species units, modeled after human military principles of combined arms tactics and mutual support. We will teach not just how to fight, but how to fight together." The hall erupted in a mixture of cheers and protests. Some species could not believe that the mighty Academy was changing its ways based on the example of soft, weak humans. But others understood, those who had seen the humans in action, who had been saved by them, who had watched their own assumptions crumble. As the ceremony concluded, Alina was called to the stage to receive a special commendation, the first ever awarded to a human at the Academy. She climbed the steps and stood before Thulvarak, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. "Commander Vasquez," the commandant said formally, "you and your squad have earned the respect of this institution. You have proven that strength takes many forms, and that the greatest warriors are not always the largest or the most powerful." He reached out and placed a medal around her neck, a crystal star that glowed with inner light. "You have shown us what humans call heart," he continued. "We do not have a word for it in our language, but I believe we will need to learn one." Alina saluted and turned to face the audience. 2 years ago we arrived here as the Velkari, the soft ones," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Your cadets mocked us, your instructors dismissed us, and your commandant expected us to fail. You saw our soft skin and short lifespans and assumed we were weak." She paused and looked at her squad, 11 humans who had become her family. "But you did not understand what you were seeing. Humans are not weak despite our softness. We are strong because of it. We feel pain more deeply, so we learn to endure it. We die more easily, so we learn to protect each other. We lack natural weapons, so we built tools and strategies that let us conquer our world. She pointed to the crystal star, now hanging at her chest. We bend, but we do not break. We fall, but we rise. And we never, ever stop fighting for each other. That is what it means to be human. And that is what we brought to your academy. As she stepped down from the stage, Draxus emerged from the crowd. The massive Vorthak had healed from his injuries, but the scars remained, both physical and otherwise. He approached Alina and performed the deepest gesture of respect his species could offer, lowering his horned head until it nearly touched the ground. "I was wrong about your kind," he said, his rumbling voice thick with emotion. "I called you weak, but you are something far more dangerous. You are patient. You endure, you adapt, and you never give up. I would be honored to call you ally, Commander Vasquez." Alina clasped his massive clawed hand in her small human one. "We would be honored to have you, Draxus." That evening, as the human squad prepared to board their transport ship home, Alina stood at the viewport and watched the stars. Earth was out there somewhere, a small blue dot in an infinite universe, and she wondered what their people would say when they learned what 12 humans had accomplished. James Chen joined her at the viewport. "Commander, do you think this changes anything? The galaxy is vast, and there are species out there far more powerful than the Vorthak." Alina smiled and watched a shooting star streak across the darkness. "Maybe," she replied, "but now they know about us. They know what humans can do when we refuse to give up, and that knowledge, that uncertainty, will spread to every corner of the galaxy." She turned to face her squad one final time. "Humanity did not survive our own wars, plagues, and near extinctions by being the strongest," she said. "We survived because we refused to stay down. And now the galaxy gets to find out what that means." The transport ship lifted off from the Raxus Prime, carrying 12 humans back to their homeworld. Behind them, the Academy began the long process of changing everything it had believed for 6,000 years. The soft ones had arrived and shattered expectations, not with strength, not with speed, but with something far more powerful: the unstoppable, relentless, magnificent spirit of humanity. And this was only the beginning.